Hello, everyone. Apologies for the late start this morning. I'm Vicki Healy, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Clean Energy Solutions Center in partnership with the International Support Network for African Development, which is supporting the Mentoring for Research program. Today's webinar is focused on the environmental sustainability in Africa. Before we get started, I'd just like to review with you some of the webinar features. And I'd like to ask our panelists if you could mute your devices while if you're not in presenting mode at the moment. Okay, so to go over some of our webinar features, for audio, you have two options. You may either listen through your computer or over your telephone. But if you choose to listen through your computer, please select the mic and speakers option that is located in the audio pane. Doing so will eliminate the possibility of feedback and echo. If you choose to dial in by phone, please select the telephone option, and a box on the right side will display the telephone number and the audio pin for you. If you're having trouble dialing in, we do have a help desk number, which is located in the United States, but it is toll free, and the phone number is 888-259-3826, and you may contact them for assistance. Additionally, if you would, I'd like to go over some of the other features. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you use the questions pane where you may type in your question, and that's located on the right-hand side in your toolbar. If you're having difficulty viewing the materials through the webinar portal, you will find PDF copies of these presentations that will be delivered to you by email from me later. Also, we are recording this presentation, so we will be sending out a link later in about 1 week that will take you to the Solution Center YouTube channel, and at that point you will be able to go back and review and listen to today's presentations, as well as see a visual, a video of the presentation today. Real quickly, I'll just go over today's webinar agenda. Today we're centered around a presentation from our guest panelist, Dr. Juliette Biao Koudenoukpo, who joins us, and she will be discussing environmental sustainability in Africa. Before we jump into her presentation, I will provide a very quick overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. And then following my presentation, Dr. Juliette will present her presentation. And following that, we will have a question and answer session where the panelists will be able to address questions submitted by you, the audience. And then at the end of the webinar, you will be automatically prompted to fill out a brief survey. So we thank you in advance for taking a moment to respond to today's presentations. Real quickly, just to give you an overview of the Solution Center, it was launched in 2011 under the Clean Energy Ministerial. And the Clean Energy Ministerial is a high-level global forum to promote policies and programs that advance clean energy technology, to share lessons learned and best practices, and to encourage the transition to a global clean energy economy. 24 countries and the European Commission are members of the Clean Energy Ministerial, covering 90% of clean energy investment and 75% of global greenhouse emissions. This webinar is provided by the Clean Energy Solutions Center, which focuses on helping governments, policymakers design and adopt policies and programs that support the deployment of clean energy technologies. This is accomplished through support in crafting and implementing policies relating to energy access, no-cost expert policy assistance, and peer-to-peer learning and training tools, such as this webinar you're attending today. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is co-sponsored by the governments of Australia, Sweden, and the United States, and we receive in-kind support from the government of Chile. The Solution Center is an international initiative that works with more than 35 international partners across its suite of different programs. Several of the partners are listed on this slide and include research organizations and programs like IRENA, the International Energy Agency, Sustainable Energy for All, and we also work closely with regionally focused entities such as the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. Now I'd like to provide a brief introduction for today's panelists. Today, as I mentioned, we have the pleasure of having the esteemed Dr. Juliette Biao Koudenoukpo, who serves as the UN Environment Director and Regional Representative for Africa. And Julia, I'll be pulling up your presentation now, and as soon as you see it on my screen, you may begin.
Okay.
Okay. And just let me know when you're ready for me to advance to the next slide.
Okay. Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about environment sustainability in Africa. First of all, let me apologize for the quality of the presentation. I prepared this PowerPoint only 2 hours ago. My schedule was very busy, and I have committed to give this presentation today. That's why really I'm here with you today. So I apologize in advance for the poor quality of the presentation. But in the interaction, I think I will be able to answer your question. First of all, let us provide some definitions here. Environment, we're talking about environmental sustainability. The structure of my presentation is as follows. We will provide some definitions, and then we will highlight some of environmental problems and the main causes. We will provide some figures on the loss of revenue due to these environmental problems, and in the end we'll share the ongoing global and regional initiatives to address environmental sustainability in Africa. Next. Next, Vicky.
Oh, there we go. It took a moment. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, definition. I'd like to provide definition of environment and environmental sustainability. Environment is defined as what surround the aggregate of surrounding things, condition or influence, what surround us. It's also defined from an ecological point of view as land, water, and air, and other livings such as plants and animals in our area. Environmental, why is the world more and more concerned about environmental sustainability? First of all, environmental sustainability, we should understand it as this aggregate of surrounding things and conditions. How do we make it? How do we make a responsive management in a way that it benefits both present and future generations? We're looking here for long-term benefit of what surrounds us. Why is the world more and more concerned about environmental sustainability? It's because we want to leave a legacy to our future generations. And when we talk about environment, we should understand environmental goods and services to respond to the need of both present and future generation when we're looking at long-term sustainability. So, as I mentioned earlier, according to the dictionary, environmental services let define environmental services. They refer to the qualitative functions of natural and produced assets of land, water, air, including related ecosystem and the biota. You have in this definition what we call ecosystem services, which United Nations Environment Program grouped as into 4 categories. We have provisioning ecosystem services, such as the production of food and water. We have regulating environmental ecosystem services, such as the control of air and disease, climate. We have also supporting environmental services, such as nutrient cycles and crop pollination, and cultural ecosystem services, such as spiritual and recreational benefit. This presentation will focus on the quality of life. We will not be focusing on on the goods. We will be focusing on the quality of the environment and how this quality for the environment affects both human and nature. So, as you could see in the definition, we talk about environment from ecological point of view, land, water, and air. Let's start with the air. In terms of environmental problem, Vicky, next please. Yeah, we start with the air. The environmental problem related to the air quality is pollution. Pollution in terms of pollution of air, pollution of water, pollution of soil, and it is estimated that 28% of diseases in Africa are associated with environmental risk, from the use of pesticide, from the unsafe and unsound waste management, from the use of biomass for energy. Pollution we can also talk about pollution from what they call this kind of pollution. Anyway, let's go. One other problem is urbanization. Due to the rapid, population growth. And as you know, Africa is home to the fastest growing country in terms of population growth. It is projected that the continent will double from 1.1 billion people today to 2.3 billion by 2050. And the population will reach up to 4 billion by the end of this century. And at least half of that number will be urbanized. By the end of the current decade, 24 of the world's 30 fastest growing cities will be in Africa, according to York in 2014. Urbanization is linked to poverty. And globally, nearly 1 billion people live in slums. And this number is projected to double to 2 billion in the next 30 years, according to UN Habitat 2008. You see, urbanization, slums, and how that affects the quality of our environment. In sub-Saharan Africa, we have another environmental problem, which is deforestation, soil erosion, desertification, wetland degradation, and insect infestation. Another problem faced by Africa in terms of environmental problem is marine litter. According to United Nations Environment Program, 80% of marine litter originates of land. A majority of scientific studies have concluded that plastic in the oceans, Vicky, next. Plastic in the oceans are coming from the land. Next, please. So I would like to provide some statistics here about what I've just presented in terms of environment problem, starting from air pollution. It is estimated that 25% of death and disease globally, and nearly 35% in regions such as sub-Saharan Africa, are related to hazard. And key area of risk include unsafe drinking water, poor sanitation and hygiene, malaria, urban air pollution, chemicals, climate change impacts, and ecosystem. We also have another challenge related to migration. Africa is known for its long history within and beyond the vast continent. China in 2008 estimated that today the number of people with African descent that live outside the continent is about 148 million. The United Nations Development Program estimated in 2010 that of 31 million people that are migrating, they are recognized as being refugees displaced mainly by war, drought, and other form of natural disasters. Let me give some example there. For example, in Ethiopia, currently we have almost 900 people who have been displaced since September in Oromia, Somalia region due to conflict. Children are particularly impacted by the crisis. Over 84,000 children do not have access to education, and up to 14,000 have been separated from their families. 120,000 under 5 children and 20,000 pregnant and lactating women are in need of nutrition assistance. Another example that I will give is the Dadaab refugees camp in Kenya, where I currently am. This refugee camp is established in 1991 to 1992 to cater for asylum seekers from the Republic of Somalia. This camp is currently home to 248,719 refugees. And from the environmental point of view, the camp is located in an ecological fragile area where there is low rainfall, prolonged drought, and seasonal flooding. What I want to highlight here is the way this refugee camp is affecting the environment. We have over 3,000 hectares of forests that are degraded due to the use of the firewood for energy. And one of the environmental challenge there is also the mismanagement of waste. We have 300 tons of solid waste that are generated on a daily basis. Next, please. So here, next again, please. No, please stay there. So stay there, please. The global environment assessment that is conducted by the Food Agriculture the United Nations Food Agriculture and Agriculture Organization (FAO), conducted between 1990 and 2015, reported that Africa and South America are largest forest area lost in the tropic. Talking about another challenge, which is desertification. According to FAO, between 1990 and 2015, average per capita forest area declined from 0.8 hectare to 0.6 hectare per person. This is because, you know, the afforestation projects have positively impacted the environment. Another challenge is illegal or legal logging of forests, and there in Central Africa, it is estimated that logging concessions, primary forests cover an area the size of Spain, and that United Nations Environment Program in 2006 estimated that deforestation could release more than 34 billion tons of carbon into the atmosphere by 2050, which also is an impact on climate change. Next, please. I think the World Bank also observed that $15 billion globally, including $5 billion in government revenue loss, is unpaid taxes, royalty, and other fees. In Gabon, illegal logging is estimated to comprise 70% of the entire industry, and in Ghana, about 60%, according to the World Bank in 2006, which is really which is a real challenge. Please, next. So I've provided some figures here in what really we lose in terms of revenue due to the environmental problems. Here we have ecosystem goods and services arising out of land and soil degradation. It is estimated about 68 billion US dollars annually. Conflict over natural resources, illegal trade in wildlife is estimated in terms of loss of revenue up to 10.9 billion annually. Illegal logging of forest products in Africa, loss of 17 billion US dollars. An illegal charcoal trade, which is a major challenge in Africa, is estimated to about 1.9 billion annual loss in revenue. Illegal and unregulated fishing, loss of $20 billion US annually, and mining, as well as a loss of revenue from tourism. The loss of revenue estimated at a total of 195 billion annually, that could be recovered and channeled to expedite socio-economic growth and development. Next, please. What are the main causes of this environmental degradation? In Africa, I think one of the major causes is the over-dependence of Africa's rural population on climate-sensitive sectors, such as agriculture for livelihood. We also noticed that the development of the new technologies have generated an increase in solid mineral mining and oil exploration. And of course, the waste, the unsafe and sound waste management is also one of the causes. Lack of basic sanitation service. UNICEF in 2017 reported that 2.3 billion people still lack a basic sanitation service. And among them, 892 million people in Africa. We have also one of energy consumption. I mentioned it earlier, which is the dependence on biomass for cooking, for heating, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Next, please. Another cause is the forest clearing for agriculture, where forests are degraded, increased urbanization, I talked about it, poor or insufficient waste management and lack of sufficient recycling and recovery. So here is, I would like to just mention quickly ongoing initiative at global, regional, and national level regarding how we address sustainable environmental sustainability. You may recall, you've heard about the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted in 2015, and prior to the adoption of the Agenda 2030, there was a common African position that was formed, and that informed also the 2030 Agenda. And what is important to notice in this 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals is that as compared to the Millennium Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda include the sustainable development. Most of the sustainable development goals are environmental related. If you look at all these 17 sustainable development goals, you can see that at least 11 of them are directly environmental related, and the over 6 or 5 are indirectly related to environment. And one of the major the value added to the Sustainable Development Goals as compared to the Millennium Development Goals is this principle of leaving no one behind. So African, in the aspirations of the 2063 Africa Agenda, there are some aspirations that really show clearly the will for African continent to address the unsustainable environment, recognizing that Africa depends a lot on natural resources, and that there are some practices and behavior that are really affecting our environment, and in turn is really increasing poverty, it's increasing diseases, and that has to be taken into account as a priority. And that is really very clearly highlighted by the African Ministerial Conference on Environment, which is a platform where ministers of environment of the 55 countries gathered and made a set of decisions on key environmental issues on the continent. We also have the United Nations Environment Assembly that gathers 193 member states, and which is a high-level decision-making body on the environment. The Environment Assembly usually takes place every 2 years, and the last one was held last year, from December 4th to December 6th, under the theme towards a pollution-free planet. Again, Africa Group was given an opportunity to form its common position that fit into the ministerial conference, the ministerial outcome document, where you could see that member states really committed to reinforce the engagement on environmental sustainability. There was also clearly highlighted by Africa the commitment on valuing the natural capital, which mostly include addressing environmental and sustainability. Even in 2015, in Addis Ababa, during the conference on financing for development, it was clear that Africa the economic growth in Africa will be sustainable unless the African member states ensure environment sustainability. And there, the engagement with the private sector came really strongly because today, with the decrease in the ODA and the public financing, it is crucial to engage private sector to ensure environmental sustainability. In conclusion, I'd like also to mention this paradox that we mentioned when we were talking about energy landscape in Africa, that it is really hard to understand that Africa, which is endowed with these huge natural resources, remain a poor country. And that is because environmental sustainability is still a challenge. We need to address those challenges in order to harness the natural capital, and that should be done in a sustainable way. We need to educate. Environmental education should contribute to change of behavior. Fighting corruption. When we talk about illegal logging, forest logging, and illegal trade in wildlife, even mining, extractive industry, there is still corruption involved in. So we will be able in Africa to mobilize domestic resources unless we ensure environment sustainability. We mentioned ecosystem services. These ecosystem services can be really, we can pay for ecosystem services. Ecotourism is one of the biggest area that can provide employment for our youth. And while also providing return on investment for conservation of our natural resources. And of course, engaging with the private sector is a key. Something that I did not talk about and which is important to share with you in terms of ongoing initiative to ensure environmental sustainability, to ensure safer environment, is also include our multilateral agreements. And I would like really to share with you one of the treaty that is a treaty of African nations, which is on prohibiting the import of hazardous, including radioactive waste in Africa. And this treaty is known as the Bamako Convention. The convention was negotiated by the 12 nations of the Organization of African Unity, which has become African Union. And that was in Mali in January 1991. And it came into force in 1998. Impetus for the Bamako Convention arose from the failure of the sister convention called the Basel Convention. Its failure to prohibit trade of hazardous waste to less developed countries, and from the realization that many developed countries were exporting toxic waste to Africa, such as cocoa case in Nigeria, Probo koala in Cote d'Ivoire in 2006, and many other cases that have not been even reported. To date, out of we have 25 out of the 55 countries that are parties to Bamako Convention. 17 others are signatories and are yet to ratify the convention, leaving behind 13 countries. A UN environment is providing technical and financial support to this to the implementation of the Bamako Convention through its secretariat. And we have just held the second conference of parties to the Bamako Convention, where it is noteworthy that African ministers reaffirm and renew their commitment toward the pollution-free Africa through their support to the implementation of the Bamako Convention. The ministers also affirm their ambition proclaimed in Bamako at the first conference of the parties to protect vulnerable groups, including children and poor communities, from negative impact resulting from unusing unsafe chemical and the use of unsound waste disposal, and to prevent Africa to become a dumping ground from toxic waste through an effective implementation of the Bamako Convention. The minister also ensured that the permanent secretariat for the Bamako Convention is established as soon as possible in this regard, and their whole heartedly accept the offer extended by the government of Mali to host the secretariat. And that really shows that African ministers are really taking ownership of this treaty, which is very important for Africa. Otherwise, Africa will become a dumping ground for developed countries. So I just wanted to highlight, to share this information about this convention, as it is related to what we are discussing today. Pollution is an issue in Africa in all forms of pollution, being air pollution, water pollution, soil pollution. It is a major challenge in Africa. I thank you for your attention.
Dr. Juliette, thank you so very much for that outstanding presentation. It was filled with great information, and I'm sure our attendees receive some valuable insights into sustainability actions across Africa. So just bear with me one moment while I launch into the question and answer session. I'll be with you in just a moment. Great. Okay, so just for all of the attendees, I'd like to remind you, that as we shift into the question and answer session, I'd like to remind you to please submit your questions using the question pane at any time. We already have some great questions coming in from the audience, and with that, Dr. Juliette, I'm going to present some of these questions to you for your consideration to answer. And I know you've touched on a lot of these topics already, but there have been some questions that might require a little more detail. The first one's around hazardous waste. And the question is, how prepared is Africa in terms of dealing with hazardous substances and waste, referring to the act of processing, of discharging the harmful waste substances that contaminate water, soil, and air, and pose a serious threat to humans and the environment, even in low concentration. So based on those parameters, how prepared is Africa to deal in terms of, how it prepares Africa for dealing with hazardous waste substances and be it through recycling or other means?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you to the participant who asked this question. You see, I've just shared with you the Treaty of African Nation, which is the Bamako Convention. I wouldn't say that African countries are well prepared. They are not. And you could see that this treaty that is prohibiting the import of hazardous, including radioactive waste, has been adopted since 1991. And the second conference of this, or the conference of the party to this convention, was held only this year. Can you imagine? We held the conference exactly on the 27th anniversary of the convention, and yet there are many, many cases of the dumping of hazardous waste in Africa. As I mentioned earlier, there are many, many cases that are unreported. The Probo Koala incident in Cote d'Ivoire really triggered this commitment of African countries to reaffirm their engagement and to really look into how to address the issue related to hazardous waste in Africa. And I have to say also that the third Environment Assembly held under the theme Toward a Pollution-Free Planet that has adopted many resolutions related to all forms of pollution, also trigger this commitment of African countries. So experts gathered and they developed an action plan toward implementation of the Bamako Convention. And to tell you at the point that the reaffirmation of this commitment was really demonstrated through interest of many countries to host the next convention, the next conference of the parties to this convention, and also many countries has expressed their willingness to host the Secretariat because they don't want to continue to depend on the United Nations Environment Program given the importance of the issue. And we will have an extraordinary, according to the rule of procedures, the COP should be held every 2 years, but African ministers are saying that they need to have an extraordinary conference early next year that will be hosted by Sudan because of the urgency to deal with this issue. So they are committed. They have reaffirmed the commitment and renew. They reaffirmed and renew the commitment, but there's still a long. They are still a long way to what should be really expected. So let's be optimistic and see how they will implement this convention. This is what I can answer to this question. Of course, in each of the countries, there are some national action plan policies, a national action plan that include addressing hazardous waste, but that will be refined in the framework of the Bamako Convention. And we are really lucky to have this conference of the parties, which is in fact the first conference of the parties to be held after the United Nations Environment Assembly on Pollution. So some of the resolution also will be implemented through this convention.
Great. That's a very detailed and excellent answer, Dr. Juliette. Thank you so much for that. Our next question is based around the cost of externalities associated with developing projects. So to pose a little bit of background around this question, the person asking the question has stated that African governments are calling on investments from China, America, and Europe. And then when manufacturers are called upon from those countries to construct industries and produce products that are, cost effective and that cost less, there are some environmental impacts. So the environmental impact of any industry would be reduced if equipment manufacturers, service providers, and consumers directly face the full cost of their activities, getting back to the externality factor, including environmental costs. Unfortunately, the actual impact is not generally quantified, and so there doesn't seem to be an environmental policy and performance in place that governs industries to pay for the environmental damage in most of the African countries. So looking at those aspects, how do we proceed from to address these challenges and ensure that externalities are included in the full cost of the project so that those types of things are paid for?
Thank you very much. This is a very good question. As I have to say that Africa group, more than ever before, is really concerned about its environment. Yes, they want investments in their continent, but they don't want investments at all costs. As a matter of fact, one of the resolutions tabled by China during the United Nations Environment Assembly was not even discussed. It was not adopted. It was soft cooperation between Africa and China. And during the discussions, you can see that Africa group really want to know at which cost the investments will come in Africa. At which cost? We currently have a an intent signed between China and Africa on a collaboration center on environmental technologies center between Africa, and it will be a tripartite agreement between the government of Kenya that will host the center, but a regional center, the UN environment, and China. Most of the discussion around this, the signing of this letter of intent was that, you know, Africa really want to make sure that whichever investment is made in Africa, it will not have any environmental impact. And of course, each of the countries are prepared or are being prepared to have an environmental impact assessment whenever any foreign country want to make an investment in their country. And in the framework of this treaty on the Bamako Convention, the environmental impact assessment will be even more required than ever before. The policies, as I said, will be refined in the countries, taking into account the need to ensure a safer environment. And Africa will not really accept any investment at the expense to the environment. Of course, there will be, in the framework of the Bamako Convention and other multilateral agreements, a monitoring and evaluation system in place to make sure that, you know, all initiatives are integrating the three dimensions of sustainable development, which are economic, environment, and social. It's not only about the environmental impact, but any investment should be socially acceptable.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question, and they are coming in quickly, so I'd like to thank our attendees for all of these great questions coming in. This is a rather sort of simple but broad question, and that is, what is the role of the health sector in helping with environmental sustainability?
This is also a very good question. In my tenure of Minister of the Environment, I was part of all the ministers of environment who signed what we call the Libreville Declaration on the linkages between health and environment. That was in Gabon in 2008. In fact, in my presentation, I mentioned that it is estimated that 28% of diseases in Africa are related to environmental risk. And African governments, they realize that if they have a safe environment, the cost of in public investment in health will decrease. This is why during the Libreville Conference on Health and Environment, the linkages between health and environmental risk were demonstrated, and the ministers came up with a declaration through which they commit to ensure cross-sectoral coordination between both ministries of health and Ministry of Environment to make sure that a safer environment can really decrease public investment, public funding in health sector. Since 2008, in each African country, there is a mechanism in place through which these two ministers ministries work together. And the follow, I think this year, myself as the regional director for Africa at UN Environment, and the regional director for Africa at the World Health Organization, we are organizing this year's conference on health and environment, and that will be in Libreville, Gabon, just to take stock of what has been achieved so far, what are the major challenges, and how we can address those challenges. And this conference will be held in Libreville, Gabon, July or August this year. So yes, there is now a cross-sectoral coordination between those ministries, and also through our projects, through UN Environment projects on poverty and environment initiative, we could develop some economic tools with ministries of finance to demonstrate that the cost of inaction to ensure safe environment is very higher than what could be spent or what could be invested to address environmental challenges. And this project is having a positive impact in each of the countries involved.
Very good. Thank you so much. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have more to add, Dr. Juliette?
Come again, please.
Oh, I was asking if you had more to add on that, or if you were ready for the next question. Okay, no. Great. Okay, thanks. Well, thanks for that answer. Your answers are so thorough and really interesting. So I know very much appreciated by our attendees. The next question is based looking at ecosystems and the degradation of those ecosystems and policies. So the question is based on sustainable development and natural resource management legislation has been designed or adopted by most African countries, but our person asking this question is stating that they see very little being done on the implementation side. So is it a matter of we need capacity building for government officials who would be implementing policy actions? Could that be part of the issue of that? And also, is there a need for structural development of an implementation program? What are your recommendations around this policy issue?
Thank you very much, Vicky. Thank you. I think the participant who asked this question is a good observation. We have a plethora of policies. We have a plethora of strategies in African countries. We have a plethora of action plans. Even before the Conference of the Party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, there were many action plans in place that include addressing environmental and sustainability. The problem is implementation. How do we walk the talk is a problem. One of the major challenge there is institutional instability, especially in the Department of the Environment. The shifting of the ministers of environment is very frequent. And it speaks to the level of the consciousness of our leaders on the environment. It is easy really to bargain the environmental department with political parties than any other ministerial department. And they keep on changing them. You will have one minister today, two months after he's gone. And this continuity in administration is not really there. The capacities also is a problem. Most of officials in this department have weak capacity that has to be built. One other thing that we are addressing now is those who participate to the negotiations at global level are the ministers of foreign affairs, who don't necessarily have the knowledge on environment. They don't have really the background for them to negotiate properly at global and regional level. And this is this disconnect we are trying to address through what we are now organizing, and it's called environment diplomacy, where we equip the diplomat with the knowledge required to negotiate on the environment. And I really appreciate, and it's having an impact. During the third conference on the environment, it has produced a positive impact in that we could see the Africa group participate very good, in an excellent way in the negotiations. And that will still continue. It will go beyond just reinforcing the capacity of the Nairobi-based diplomat, but we are also building the capacity of Addis Ababa-based diplomat, as Ethiopia Addis Ababa is the diplomatic capital of Africa, and where it is also home to the African Union Commission. We will also reinforce the capacity of the Africa Group in New York and in Geneva, and coordinate the activities so that to really strengthen the Africa voice in negotiations. So we are in this process, and also we are strengthening the capacity of ministries, environmental, in Department of Environment, and also finally the African Ministerial Conference that is a platform for African ministers to craft decisions and also come up with key resolution on environment, is also kind of taking more and more responsibility, and also improving the participation of Africa Group in negotiations.
Great, thank you so much. Just a quick note to everyone. You're all submitting just fantastic questions, and I do know that we have more questions than we have time to answer. So if we do not get to your question during the session, I will be sharing them directly with Dr. Juliette so that she can respond to you directly through email regarding your questions. So if we're not able to get to your question, I apologize, but we will follow up with some answers. Now, the next question, Dr. Juliette, this is a simple question, but I think it's an interesting one because it's something I grapple with in my work, is looking at rural areas across Africa. How do we address achieving a sustainable environment in these areas where it's often difficult to convey information and resources to help them address their actions related to creating a sustainable environment.
Vicky, would you mind repeating the question, please? I did not get the last
Oh yeah,
question.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at the rural areas in Africa, where there's not a lot of access to energy and information and things like that, how do we work with those rural communities to help them understand ways in which they can create ways and actions to help them build sustainable environments within their rural communities?
Thank you. I think we've been working with rural communities in Africa for long. Personally, I work with the rural communities in about 25 countries. And when I talk about countries, I'm not talking about capital cities. I'm talking about villages. So most of the projects, the environmental projects, involve the rural communities. What was the major challenge at this time was the question of illiteracy, because when it's come to involve them in training, we face this challenge of illiteracy, which was addressed with through what we called I don't know what was the name in English, but is the kind of literacy that is adapted to the rural areas and adapted to the target group. Another challenge was the lack of infrastructure. The lack of infrastructure and also the difficulty to change the behavior, and also one thing that is related to agriculture is the sustainable practices that in the rural areas. So one of the solution that is being provided by UN Environment is what we call ecosystem-based adaptation for food security, which is in fact one, we address it through a framework, and second, we address it also at operational level. As a framework, we create a kind of platform that involves state and non-state actors, including farmers, private sectors, such as banks, and youth, women, and different, a diverse range of stakeholders who can work together and adopt the practices of ecosystem-based adaptation, and also who can receive grants from the banks, what we call innovative financing, only if they have adopted the ecosystem-based approach. And through this approach also, we kind of promote the value agro chain. And you can see that in each steps, from the raw material, we also look at how to reduce the carbon emission. In the processing, the commercialization, the trade, all these steps are looking to very careful and see and bring into the solution to reduce low emission. But then you know, another challenge is how to make this agriculture more attractive to the youth, because the understanding of the youth, agriculture is very hard and is not something that the youth can say, especially in rural area. They prefer to go in the cities. But today, if we can find a way to link agriculture to what is more interesting to the youth, for example, information, the new technology on information and communication, if we can find a way to create that link, I think agriculture will be more attractive to the youth, and we can really address youth unemployment somehow. So basically, the main challenge to address in rural area is first issue of infrastructure, and also capacity building and education. Over to you.
Thank you. Oh, great. Yeah, another great answer from you, Dr. Juliette. Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question. And then at that point, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Adedoyin Adeleke, who is leading the work at the International Support Network for African Development, and leading the work on the Mentoring for Research program. So we'll save a few minutes for him. But one last question for you, Dr. Juliette, is around something else that's kind of near and dear to my heart because of the work I do at NREL, and it is related to biomass for energy. Can you speak a little bit to the environmental impacts in Africa related to developing biofuels, biomass pellets, and biogas, of course, using biomass for these products? What are the environmental impacts and degradation in Africa, issues around that technology?
Thank you, Vicky, and thanks to the participants. I mentioned in my presentation that Africa is strongly dependent on biomass for energy, and we have in collaboration with the African Development Bank, UN Environment has developed the Atlas of Africa Energy Resources. We have we launched this Atlas last year in Durban, and one of the key findings of this Atlas is that due to the high cost of energy access in Africa, and especially in sub-Saharan Africa, if the ongoing initiative of the African Development Bank on energy does not really succeed, it will take up to 2080 to Africa to have full access to energy, which means that by this time, African countries will be relying on biomass for energy, which means that the forests will continue to be degraded, which means that deforestation, erosion, and pollution will still continue. So I don't have the exact figures here on what is really the rate of deforestation as a result of the use of biomass for energy. But I can tell you that sustainable charcoal production and consumption is a big issue. It's a big issue, and there are many hotspot countries where the commercialization of charcoal is very considerable, and it's form a big part of the economies in the countries. I can mention, for example, Tanzania, I can mention Ethiopia, Somalia, where also another impact is that the commercialization of charcoal is also fueling the conflict in the Horn of Africa. I can really provide, I'm talking to researchers. I really need to provide evidence of what I'm saying. I can provide you with more information with evidence via emails. In terms of biogas, I think there are several initiatives here and there, but it's still at small scales and need to be scaled up. And this is where the challenge is. And one of our European Union Commission funded projects on low emission development strategy also include activities on biogas, but this time at a higher scale, but still at a pilot stage. We hope that it will be expanded as we're getting more and more funding. Over to you, Vicky.
Oh, great, very good. Thank you again so much, Dr. Juliette, for that very informative Q&A session. Excellent answers, excellent questions from our attendees. So with that, before we have our closing remarks, Adedoyin, would you like to make a few remarks to our attendees?
Thank you very much, Vicky. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Vicky. Many thanks to Dr. Juliette for your time and for the very detailed presentation and Q&A session. But before I make my remarks, somebody asked a question asking about, so the question says, environmental sustainability is a big issue. It also requires to use municipal waste as a source of energy production. That's true. It's a problem of many towns in Ethiopia and also could be a problem of other developing countries in Africa. Hence, is there any plan on a project to work on this now? There are a number of initiatives, like Dr. Juliette has mentioned, a number of projects going on. Of course, many of them are still at the pilot stage and things like that. But there is a mega project in Ethiopia, particularly in Addis Ababa. I don't know if the participant that asked the question knows about it. That is what called the REPPIE project. It's REPPIE project. You can Google it, and it's also on our Facebook page. I posted something about it on our Facebook page. It's a project that it's both solving energy issues and then and environment issues, because it's incinerating per day 50. That's 1,400 tons of municipal waste and converting to electricity. And by that 1,400 municipal waste represents 80% of the daily municipal waste of the whole city of Addis Ababa. And by that is supplying, the electricity that's going to be supplied from the project represents 80% of the household energy demand in Addis Ababa. You can search it, and then you can see, if you check our Google, our ISNAD Africa Facebook page, you're going to see something about it, and then you can link to read about the project more. I hope that helps. Of course, there are also clean energy, clean cook stoves here and there in a number of countries. So I want to thank Dr. Juliette for this.
Adedoyin, sorry, can I add on to that?
Yes, please. Go ahead, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to say that there are several initiatives on waste to energy that are happening with the support of UN Environment in Addis Ababa, in Ethiopia, in Ghana, in Burkina Faso, through the European Union Commission funded project that we call Switch Africa Green. Please, if you can Google it and see, or if you like, if you want, I can forward some information about it. It's really gaining momentum. Waste to energy. In Ghana, they are really very good success stories that can be shared with you.
Okay, if you share that with me, I can disseminate it either through our social media platform or by emails. That'll be very good. Thank you very much, ma'am. Now, I must say that I made a comment somewhere. I said Africa, this is a time that I'm not sure there's ever been any time in history that Africa has gotten so much global focus as a time like this. So we must take very serious advantage of all these opportunities that are coming to us. But as Dr. Juliette was presenting, I noted something because the essence of all these webinar programs are not just to tell you things. One is to expose you to some of these issues, particularly because most of the students here are not coming from environmental discipline, but they want to do their research in that line. So it might be good to note that it's always a good strategy when you're doing your research and you're writing your thesis that you review the policy document, because I saw that he really elaborated on the Bamako Convention. I mean, it's going to be a good. It's good. It would be good if people doing research in this line can at least review some of these documents and other conventions, other documents. Because one thing we have noticed is that as engineers, as scientists, we are always bothered about just the technical parts and then the lab work. But policy determines how far even the technology we are working on can go. So I think it's a good strategy. And for me, if somebody is here that's probably still considering the topic and all of that, I have jotted about 3 topics you can work on based on this presentation. So I think the essence of all these webinars is just is first to intimate you about, to expose you to some of these issues and see how you can use your research to address some of the challenges. That's the main objective. So with this, I want to say thank you for joining, and I want to say thank you to Vicky also for your time and for coordinating all this. Thank you.
Thank you, Adedoyin. Very much my pleasure, and thank you for your remarks and the support you're giving to this program. Dr. Juliette, before I move on, did you have any closing remarks you would like to make?
Thank you, Vicky, and thank you. I thank all the participants. Thank you I thank Adedoyin for his support. I think as Adedoyin mentioned, it will be very interesting to have researchers focus their research on hazardous waste. You know, Bamako Convention is a treaty of African nations, if not the unique treaty of African nations. And the African countries, due to all these cases of dumping of hazardous waste in their countries, and I mentioned that there are many reported cases. Today in Cote d'Ivoire, people are still suffering of the disease, having been affected by the dumping of the hazardous waste. Prior to Bamako Convention, the Basel Convention was adopted in 1987, which addressed only the movement of transboundary waste in Africa. At that time, the radioactive wastes were excluded. And now the Bamako Convention is more rigorous and is also include a larger number of hazardous waste that have to be banned from the import in Africa, and they took this decision because they realized that Africa doesn't have the required technology to deal with those wastes that were imported in their country. So the level of environmental consciousness in Africa is very high now. The environmental dimension is gaining momentum in Africa. Africa voice is being very, very strengthened, and they are participating effectively in both global and regional processes. This is the moment that you should really focus your research to help us to address those challenges. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. So before we conclude, just a few notes. First of all, on behalf of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, I'd like to extend a very hearty thank you to Dr. Juliette and to Adenoyan, who is our partner through ISNAD Africa. And of course, to all of you, our attendees, for participating in today's webinar. We very much appreciate your time and hope in return you receive some valuable insights from the presentations. I'd also like to state that we will be posting this webinar to our YouTube channel, and we will send you a link to that recording and PDFs of these presentations by email in approximately 1 week. And then you may also access other valuable webinar recordings at the Clean Energy Solutions Center's YouTube channel. We've provided links on this slide for you to access that information. And then finally, I'd like to ask you if you would mind taking a moment to complete the short survey that will appear on your screen when we conclude the webinar. So with that, I just want to wish everyone a great weekend. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening, and we hope to see you again at future Clean Energy Solutions Center events. With that, this concludes our webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Let's stay in touch.